A family gathers around the fireplace on a stormy night. The wind rattles the shutters and howls through the chimney. The children huddle closely together. Their hearts race in anticipation. Grandfather takes central stage and begins the story. He spins a terrifying tale of a governess going to work in a dark and gloomy castle, only to discover that the attic is haunted by the ghosts of children who died on the property years ago. You'd be forgiven for assuming that this scene took place on Halloween. But for the Victorians, sitting around the fire and sharing ghost stories was a Christmas Eve tradition. I'm Nicole Miras, and this is Fireside Fables. Much of how we celebrate Christmas comes from the Victorians. Of course, gift-giving, caroling, Christmas feasts, this all predates the 19th century. But prior to the Victorian period, Christmas celebrations would have more closely resembled Mardi Gras than the family-friendly holiday that we have today. Excessive drinking, feasting, and community celebrations were the norm. But along with the greater urbanization of the 19th century came the shifting moral matrix from the wider community to the domestic sphere. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert were the ultimate models of domestic morality, and this growing inwardness of family life influenced how Christmas was celebrated. For example, it was actually Prince Albert who popularized the Christmas tree in the Anglosphere. The earliest Christmas trees date back to 15th century Germany. They were first used to represent the tree of knowledge of good and evil for paradise plays, which were showcased on the feast day of Adam and Eve on December 24th. These evergreen trees were decorated with fruit, and over time, they were used in the home rather than for public performances. Queen Victoria's husband, Prince Albert, was from Germany, and he brought this tradition with him to England. Images of Queen Victoria with her consort gathering around the Christmas tree with their children represented a major shift in how the holiday was celebrated. Heightened consumerism also played a role. Thanks to industrialization, toys for children were much cheaper, making it easier for families of more modest means to participate in traditions around Father Christmas or Santa Claus. Increasingly, Christmas became centered around children. The telling of ghost stories does predate the Victorians, though it's unclear when this custom began. William Shakespeare's The Winter's Tale, written between 1609 and 1611, does reference the practice of telling ghost stories during the winter. When Hermione asks Mamillius to share a ghost story, he responds, "A sad tale's best for winter. I have one of sprites and goblins." An even earlier reference appears in Christopher Marlowe's The Jew of Malta, when Barabbas says, "Now I remember those old women's words, who in my wealth would tell me winter's tales, and speak of spirits and ghosts that glide by night." The Jew of Malta was first performed in 1592. So we know that as far back as the 16th century, there existed a tradition of telling scary stories during the winter season. Winter represented the death of the natural world, and this atmosphere of cold and decay could explain this association with ghostly activity. It's impossible to know exactly when this folk tradition began. What we can determine is that the tradition of telling ghost stories on Christmas Eve and during Advent exploded in Victorian Britain. One of the chief causes of this was the Industrial Revolution. Suddenly, printing not just books, but magazines, pamphlets, penny dreadfuls, and more became much cheaper. Thanks to growing literacy, a greater share of the public could purchase magazines that included scary stories during the winter, as well as Christmas ghost story collections like Jerome K. Jerome's 1891 anthology, Told After Supper. Charles Dickens played a prominent role in popularizing the sale of Christmas ghost stories, without a doubt the most famous of which is A Christmas Carol, the tale of the greedy Ebenezer Scrooge, published in 1843. All alone on Christmas Eve, Scrooge is visited by the ghost of his former business partner, as well as the ghosts of Christmases past, present, and future, each serving to clarify the sins of his past, as well as the hopeless path that he is embarking on unless he is able to change his ways. This story spoke to the anxieties of urbanization, massive income inequality, and the loosening of community bonds in a rapidly changing Britain. But it also promoted the idea of the Christmas spirit, a time to be charitable and give back. Another famous example of a Christmas ghost story, and in my opinion, a far more frightening one, is The Turn of the Screw by Henry James, published in 1898. The Turn of the Screw is a Gothic novella that begins on Christmas Eve, with a group of friends sitting around a fire and sharing ghost stories. One of them has brought a manuscript that was written by his sister's late governess. Inside is a tale of psychological horror of a young woman working as a governess in an English country estate. Over time, she becomes convinced that the children she is charged with caring for are being haunted by ghosts. Christmas-centered ghost stories became so popular that other famous writers got in on the trend, including our favorite spiritualist, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Sir Walter Scott, and Margaret Oliphant. I shared a video on the spiritualist movement several weeks ago, and it's likely that the Victorian fascination with ghosts, psychics, mediums, etc. probably played a role in elevating the Christmas ghost story. It's unclear why this trend died out when so many other Victorian customs remained. It's possible that the rise of Halloween in the United States as a commercial holiday could have sucked the oxygen out of the room, so to speak. With October 31st being the designated day for ghosts, it's possible that people didn't feel the need to also tell ghost stories on December 24th. And this is purely my own hypothesis, but I also wonder if the improvements in how homes were heated may have also played a role. What made ghost stories in the winter so compelling was that it was a time when the natural world was dying back before your eyes. But as the 20th century progressed, centralized heating became the norm. And you start to see advancements in insulated coats. So it doesn't matter anymore if you're not rich and you can't afford a fur coat. You can buy one of these instead. In other words, winter became far more comfortable and cozy than it was for the Victorians. Not to mention, you no longer had to light a fire and gather around the flames in order to get through a cold night. You can light a fire if you want to, but you don't have to. This circling around the fire, which was often the impetus for storytelling, was essentially eliminated as a daily necessity. Now, there are a few exceptions. Disney's The Nightmare Before Christmas, released in 1993, is a modern example of Halloween motifs colliding with Christmas. And of course, there's A Christmas Carol, which remains hugely popular not just as a short story, but in theatrical productions and film adaptations. But I'm curious what you all think. Is this something that we should bring back? Or should ghost stories remain the territory of Halloween? Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe. We have new episodes every single week. Be well, and I'll see you next time.